Hi everybody, it's Dana from the Monroe County Public Library, and I'm here to read some stories to you and to do some flannel boards today. And I want to start off by singing our song, Hello Friends. Are you ready? Here we go. Hello friends, hello friends, hello friends. It's time to say hello. Well, I have something fun to show you today. It's a little bit of knitting. Look at that. It's a little rainbow. And when you knit, you have two needles. These are your needles. And you put your needle through a loop, just like that. And you pop it through, you bring it around, and you pop it off. Now, people like to knit sweaters. They like to knit scarves. Some people knit socks. All kinds of things that you can knit. But you have to be very careful, because if you get a stitch, and that's what each one of these little loops is called, a stitch. If one of these little loops isn't in there just right, the whole thing will fall apart. And I'm going to show you how. If you have one little loose stitch, all of the sudden it can all come out and unravel. And all of a sudden you're left with nothing left. All your knitting is gone. Well, that's what happens in my first story. And this story is called No Roses for Harry. This is Harry right here. No roses for Harry. Oh, looks like he got a present. Harry was a white dog with black spots. On his birthday, he got a present from Grandma. It was a woolen sweater with roses on it. Harry didn't like it the moment he saw it. He did not like the roses. When he tried it on, it felt cozy and snug, but he still didn't like it. He thought it was the silliest sweater he'd ever seen. The next day, when Harry went downtown with the children, he wore his new sweater. When people saw it, they laughed. When dogs saw it, they barked. Harry made up his mind then and there to lose Grandma's present. When they went into a big store to shop, the children took off his sweater and let him carry it. This was just what Harry wanted. First, he tried to lose it in the pet department. Oh, I think he left it on the table, didn't he? Uh-oh. But a man found it and gave it back. Then he tried to lose it in the grocery department. Oh, it looks like he shoved it in a shelf there, didn't he? Uh-oh. But a lady found it. And she gave it back. Well, then he tried to lose it in the flower department. Oh, it looks like a flower, doesn't it? Kind of looks like that rose bush. Maybe he'll get lucky this time. And nobody will find it. But no luck. A little boy found it and gave it back. The children didn't let Harry carry it anymore. They made him wear it. And as they started home, Harry was beginning to think that he'd never lose that sweater. When he got back home, his friends were waiting to play with him, But Harry didn't feel like playing, so they left him alone. Well, as he sat wondering what to do, he noticed a loose stitch in his sweater. He pulled at the wool just a little at first, and then a bit more, and a little bit more, and Harry didn't know it, but a bird was watching him. In a minute, Harry had pulled out quite a long piece of the wool, and the end of it lay on the grass, all behind him. Suddenly, the bird flew down, and quick as a flash, she took the end of the wool in her beak and flew away with it. It all happened before Harry could even blink. The sweater began to disappear right before Harry's eyes. First one leg, then the neck, then the other leg, then the back, and finally the whole thing was just one long piece of wool flying off into the sky. The sweater was gone. Harry could hardly believe it. He barked and jumped with joy, and then he ran out of the yard. He ran down the street, barking thank you to the bird over and over again. The bird and wool were just a tiny speck in the sky, but Harry kept following them. There it goes. There goes his sweater. He came home thirsty and tired and was having a drink in the kitchen when the children ran in. "We got a letter from Grandma," one of them said. "She's coming to visit us." Uh-oh. Harry thought of the sweater, and his tail drooped. Before Grandma came, the family looked everywhere for the sweater. They wanted her to see how nice Harry looked in it. Well, of course, they couldn't find it. Only Harry knew why. There was no more sweater, was there? When Grandma arrived, Harry ran to her with his leash, and then he sat up and begged. "All right, Harry," said Grandma. "After I've had my lunch and, well, a nap, we'll go for a walk." That afternoon, Harry and Grandma and the children started off on their walk, and Harry barked happily and pulled towards the park. Well, when they got to the park, Harry pulled harder. The children let him off the leash, and he ran on ahead. He seemed to be looking for something. All at once, he stopped under a big tree. He looked up and began to bark and wag his tail. And Grandma and the children came running. I wonder what he was looking at. What do you think he found? They got to the tree and looked up, and suddenly one of the children said, "I see a nest. It's made of wool," said the other one, "and it's the very same color as Harry's sweater." They shouted together. "It is Harry's sweater," exclaimed Grandma. Well, just then a bird looked out of the nest. "Look, Grandma, look," shouted the children. "Harry gave his sweater to a bird." "I wonder how he did that," said Grandma. Well, the bird sang, and Harry wagged his tail even harder. Oh, look at that. It's a little nest with roses on it. At Christmas, Harry got a present from Grandma. It was a new sweater. Harry liked this one very much. When he tried it on, he felt cozy and snug, just like the bird in the nest. But best of all, it was white with black spots. So he liked sweaters. He just didn't like a sweater with roses on it. All right. Well, I have kind of a fun story for you, and it's called Joseph Had a Little Overcoat. And I'm going to tell it to you right now. Since we're talking about warm things like sweaters, well, an overcoat is just kind of a longer word for a coat. And this is Joseph. Well, winter was coming and Joseph was getting very cold. And so he made himself a coat, a big overcoat. It was warm and he wore it all the time. He wore it so much that he wore it out. It started to get holes in the bottom. And so he took some scissors and he cut off the bottom and he made himself a jacket. Well, this was a very nice jacket and it kept him pretty warm. And he wore it all around the town. And he wore it so much that he wore it out. And he wore out the sleeves. They had holes in them and they were so dirty he couldn't get them clean anymore. And so, snip, 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 he snipped off the sleeves. And he made himself a vest out of the leftover fabric. Well, that vest was very fancy looking, and he wore that vest, and he wore it and wore it, and he wore it so much that he wore it out. And now, so much of it was worn out that he had to cut part of it off, and all he had left was a scarf. Well, the scarf kept him warm, and it was very, very nice, and it looked very handsome on him, and he felt so handsome in it that he wore it a lot. Matter of fact, he wore it so much that he wore it out. Well, he had just enough left after he snipped off the worn-off parts to make himself a tie. It's a very nice tie. And he wore that tie to synagogue, and he wore that tie to his sister's wedding, and he felt very handsome in that tie. But one day when he was eating soup, he spilled soup all over his tie, and he couldn't get it out, and he knew he couldn't wear that tie anymore. So he only had enough fabric left to make himself a little button, just a little button. And that little button kept his shirt nice and tidy. And he wore that little button, and he loved that little button. But one day, that little button popped right off. And do you know what? He never found it. So then he wondered, what am I going to make now? And you know what he did? He made a story. Yeah. And the story was called Joseph Had a Little Overcoat. And we have this story at the library. And this is a fun story. It's just like the story I just told you. And what's fun about it is, here he is with his scarf. And then, when you turn the page, see this right here? It's a little hole. His scarf turns into a tie. Yeah. So that's Joseph Had a Little Overcoat. And that was the flannel board story that goes along with it. That's a fun story. Well, I have a very fun story for you right now. This one is very funny. And it is also about knitting and about knitting sweaters. But it doesn't have a dog in it. Nope. This one's called Leave Me Alone. And there she is. She's got her knitting needles. Let's find out what happens to her. Once there was an old woman. She lived in a small village, in a small house. With a very big family. Oh my goodness. She doesn't look particularly happy, does she? Winter was coming. That meant she had some very important knitting to do, but it wasn't getting done. Can you tell why? Yeah. I think you probably know why. Her grandchildren were very curious about her knitting. Were you supposed to hit it with a ball? Could you eat it? Could you make your brother eat it? Why did the ball get smaller and smaller when you chased it? The old woman was at the end of her rope. So she made her bed as neatly as she could. She swept the floorboards until they more or less shone. She drank tea from her samovar. It's a very fancy word there. She's got her tea in. She packed up her things in a big sack and she shouted back as she left. What did she say? Leave me alone! And there she goes. The old woman walked through the deep, dark forest. She made a fire so that she could see what she was doing, and then she sat down and began to knit. The bear family was very curious about the light from her fire and about what she might taste like. Uh-oh. There's a bear behind her. What did she say? Leave me alone! Shouted the old woman. But they didn't listen because they don't speak English. So she picked up her sack and she left. Where's she going? She's going up the mountain, isn't it? Isn't she? Well, the old woman climbed up the mountainside. It was cold, so she found a small, sheltered place. And then she sat down and she began to knit. Well, the mountain goats were very excited to have a visitor, especially one that brought snacks. Uh-oh. So what did she say? That's right. Leave me alone! The old woman shouted. But the goats were too busy fighting over the red ones, which they all agreed were the best. So she picked up her sack and she left. Where did she go? Where is she going to go? That's where she went. The old woman climbed higher and higher up the mountain. She reached the top and she climbed onto the moon. Well, certainly she's going to be alone up there, right? Well, she found a rock that was shaped like a chair. She sat down and she began to knit. Uh-oh. The little green moon men had never seen a woman before, old or otherwise. They examined her with their handheld scanners that went beep boop. She doesn't seem to be enjoying that at all. Leave me alone! She screamed, but the little green moon men couldn't hear her because they didn't have any ears. So she picked up her sack and she left through a wormhole. A big black hole in space. Well, the void on the other side of the wormhole was very dark and very quiet. She was absolutely, completely, utterly alone. It was perfect. There she is, knitting away, happy as can be. Soon, she had no more yarn and 30 little sweaters, and she was alone. So she put the 30 little sweaters into her big sack. She swept the void until it more or less shone. She drank tea from her samovar, and then she picked up the sack and left through another wormhole. There she goes. Where do you suppose she went? Look at that. When she came out the other side, everything was right where she had left it. The house looks nice and tidy, doesn't it? And she didn't say a word. I think they're happy she's back. And look, she's got a sack full of sweaters. Yep, so she came home with her sack, and all the kids got their sweaters. And now, there you can see, everybody's got their sweater. And that was called Leave Me Alone. I like that. That's pretty funny. It's by Vera Brosgol, or Brosgol. I'm not quite sure how you say her name. All right. That's it for me today. It's been fun. I've had a good time with you. And I'm going to sing Goodbye Friends. Are you ready? Goodbye friends. Goodbye friends. Goodbye friends. It's time to say goodbye. Goodbye everybody. Stay safe and healthy out there.